Historical records define the P-51 Mustang as an absolute operational triumph. But declassified archival data reveals a systemic human tragedy. Why did the most advanced fighter of the war become a death trap for its own pilots? The answer lies in the statistics. Researchers pull the United States Army Air Force's loss reports from the archives. Heavy cardboard folders hit the desk. Dry paper rustles. Analysts systematically cross-reference combat shootdowns with total airframe write-offs. The numbers do not align. During the brutal air war over Europe, the 8th Air Force launched thousands of high-altitude bomber escorts from freezing English airfields. Post-war literature portrays the aircraft as the ultimate savior of that campaign. In reality, enemy aviation did not cause the majority of pilot fatalities. Total operational losses for the Mustang reached roughly 2,500 units. Analysts calculate the exact ratios. 2,000 of these machines vanished without ever engaging a Luftwaffe interceptor. Hidden operational threats destroyed nearly 80%. A single restored fighter dictates the modern historical narrative. By 1953, the 15,000 manufactured units transitioned into civilian exhibits. This shift systematically obscured the documented casualty rates. Museums displayed spotless airframes. The pilot fatalities remained buried in military archives. The Air Force had briefly recalled the machines from storage. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the redesignated F-51 executed low-altitude ground attacks. The operational environment proved entirely hostile. Propeller-driven platforms lacked the speed to evade modern interception. During 1953, Soviet-built MiG-15 jets dictated the airspace. The structural performance gap rendered the older aircraft completely obsolete. Modern aviation markets highlight this extreme historical disconnect. The original wartime assembly required exactly $50,000. Today, private collectors purchase restored airframes for over $1 million. They acquire polished aluminum. They bypass the documented reality of burning fuel lines and lethal weather fronts. Its combat operations ceased. The structural disconnect between high command and frontline reality peaked on August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito recorded his surrender broadcast in Tokyo. The war concluded. The military bureaucracy continued to operate on procedural inertia. Command issued the recall code word Utah to terminate all Pacific strikes. The signal failed to propagate. Overextended communication networks compromised the entire Pacific theater. A 3-hour transmission delay constituted a standard logistical failure. The base radios at Iwo Jima received no incoming transmissions. 19-year-old Philip Schlamberg and Captain Jerry Yellen initiated their mission. The operational radius to the Japanese home islands exceeded 1,000 miles. The strike directive remained active. They executed a brief, low-altitude strafing run over the Honshu airfields. Ground anti-aircraft batteries engaged the fighters. The Mustangs executed an evasion climb. They penetrated a massive weather front. Static filled the headsets. The absolute radio silence in the headphones underscored the absence of the cancellation code. Yellen broke through the dense cloud cover. He scanned the empty sky. The second fighter failed to emerge. Yellen checked his remaining fuel. The instruments indicated critical depletion. He banked the aircraft. He returned to base alone. Yellen landed the aircraft. Ground personnel delivered the immediate debriefing. The global conflict had officially terminated 3 hours prior to his arrival. Schlamberg disappeared inside the storm system. Post-war search operations yielded no results. To this day, the Department of Defense has not located his remains or the aircraft wreckage. Captain Jerry Yellen documented the inevitability of this loss the night before the final sortie. August 14, 1945. The squadron gathered for a routine night briefing. The air inside the metal Quonset hut remained suffocating and humid. First Lieutenant Philip Schlamberg sat in the rows, 19 years old. As command outlined the strict parameters of the upcoming mission, The young pilot leaned toward Yellen and whispered a definitive calculation. If he launched tomorrow, he would not return. The strategic context rendered the operation entirely obsolete. Atomic strikes had already leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Imperial surrender was a matter of hours. The global conflict had reached its absolute conclusion. Yet despite the impending geopolitical collapse of the enemy, bureaucratic inertia dictated one more heavy strike on Tokyo airfields. Command protocols remained active. Crews faced combat in a resolved war. Yellen recognized the acute psychological fatigue. He provided a direct operational exit. He ordered Schlamberg to consult the flight surgeon, knowing that a brief evaluation would immediately ground the lieutenant and remove him from the combat roster. The military apparatus offered a legal mechanism for survival. Philip Schlamberg refused the medical exemption. High Command finalized the operational parameters that would eventually kill Schlamberg in March 1945. This calculated decision set a baseline. Within months, the new Pacific Air Corridor would systematically erase dozens of aviators and their machines. The catalyst was the American capture of Iwo Jima. The volcanic landmass provided a strategic staging ground. It sat exactly 790 miles south of Tokyo. This specific metric dictated a new reality. 790 miles represented the absolute physical operational limit of the Mustang platform, even with maximum capacity external drop tanks attached. Fuel margins vanished. Reserves became statistical illusions. Leadership reviewed the engineering data. They authorized the flights anyway. The military classified these extreme deployments as very long-range operations. The inaugural mission launched on April 7, 1945. 96 Mustangs departed the island. Their primary objective involved escorting heavy bombers over Honshu. Japanese interceptors engaged the American formation. The resulting dogfights mirrored European combat models, but the actual atmospheric engagement remained brief. Returning squadrons submitted their debriefing documents. Intelligence officers tallied the final count of enemy aircraft claimed destroyed. 21. Japanese interceptors were no longer the primary threat. Traversing a 1,500-mile round trip over the Pacific Ocean required absolute navigational precision from severely exhausted pilots. How does an aviator survive when the nearest landmass is 700 miles away? The open ocean became significantly more dangerous than enemy anti-aircraft fire. European theater missions provided visual terrain references. A navigational miscalculation simply meant crossing the wrong European coordinates. The Pacific theater offered zero visual data. Geography was the ultimate adversary. The pilot checks the compass. He identifies a 1-degree alignment error. He watches the fuel indicator steadily drop. The only auditory input is the monotonous, hypnotic hum of the engine over featureless blue water. The mathematical cost of this deviation was absolute. A course error of exactly 1 degree over a 750-mile outbound vector generated a 13-mile lateral displacement. Iwo Jima encompassed merely 8 square miles of volcanic rock. The aircraft missed the island entirely. The Packard engine starved of fuel. To mitigate operational attrition, Command established extensive maritime rescue networks. B-29 bombers executed offshore search operations. Catalina flying boats maintained readiness for immediate surface extractions. Submarines and destroyer escorts actively patrolled the designated ocean sectors. The mathematical inevitability of oceanic catastrophe materialized on June 1, 1945. The mission cost 27 aircraft. Enemy fire claimed exactly 1. 184 Mustangs launched to escort bombers toward Osaka. Meteorological intelligence had identified an approaching weather front. Staff officers calculated the squadrons could overfly the system at 10,000 feet. The assessment was entirely wrong. The fighters flew directly into a massive storm cell. Freezing rain brutally hammered against the plexiglass canopies at 10,000 feet. Ice instantly coated the wing profiles. Severe turbulence violently tore the rigid formations apart. Coordinated squadrons dissolved into blind, solitary machines. Pilots lost visual contact. Zero visibility triggered mid-air collisions. Disorientation drove planes directly into the ocean. 24 aviators died. This single-day deficit exceeded the weekly production output of an entire North American aviation assembly plant. The operational disaster set a lethal precedent. Between July and mid-August, 85 more American pilots perished during deep strikes. Mechanical faults and weather anomalies eliminated them. By the campaign's conclusion, operations had consumed over 130 Mustangs and their pilots. While environmental anomalies decimated Pacific squadrons, European theater pilots confronted an unprecedented technological threshold. The adversary deployed machines capable of 530 miles per hour. By April 1945, the conventional Luftwaffe had collapsed. Yet the skies harbored a terminal threat: the Messerschmitt Me-262. The world witnessed the first operational jet fighter. 4 30mm cannons equipped the airframe. A single burst dismantled heavy bombers. The Mustang faced absolute destruction in direct engagements. The P-51 surrendered its apex status. An operational velocity deficit of nearly 100 miles per hour dictated a radical doctrinal shift. Direct pursuit became mathematically impossible. The speed advantage meant a Mustang pilot possessed a mere 3 minutes to execute an intercept during the enemy approach. Allied aviators adapted. They orbited known German airfields. They stalked the landing trajectories. Early jet turbines lacked low-speed acceleration capabilities. Pilots exploited this mechanical flaw. They executed ambushes just feet above the concrete runways. The hunters became opportunistic scavengers. Strategic bombing shattered German supply networks. The technological leap arrived too late to alter the geopolitical reality. Factories managed to assemble roughly 1,400 units of the revolutionary interceptor, but industrial collapse and fuel shortages crippled the deployment phases. Most airframes never left the dispersal areas. The total operational fleet that successfully reached the combat zone peaked at a fraction of production. The final tally of active jet fighters stood at under 300. Neutralizing the jet threat did not halt the casualty rate. It merely forced pilots down to critically low altitudes. The mechanics of ground attack dictated absolute predictability. The pilot initiated a rapid descent below 500 feet. He leveled the aircraft. The machine flew in a rigid straight line, heading directly into the converging tracers of quad-mounted installations. Were there any chances of survival if hit at 200 feet? The physics of a parachute left no time for deployment. Impact was imminent. A shockwave and the dull metallic clang of a 37mm shell detonated right under the thin floor of the cockpit. Command officially classified a second pass over any target as a death sentence. Gunners already knew the trajectory. The German defense grid relied on sheer volume. Crews operated 30,000 light 20 and 37mm cannons alongside 9,000 heavy 88mm guns. This combined arsenal of 39,000 weapons generated massive fire density. Analysts placed one active barrel for every single square mile of German strategic infrastructure. Combat logs document the total loss of 2,500 fighters. Enemy interceptors accounted for only 550 confirmed kills. The remaining 80% of the fleet succumbed entirely to ground fire, strafing accidents, and immediate mechanical failures. Pilots navigating the barrage of 9,000 heavy anti-aircraft weapons relied strictly on the mechanical architecture of the Mustang. Statistical analysis recorded a lethal discrepancy. When enemy fire struck a thunderbolt, 8 out of 10 airframes returned safely. The Lightning brought 7 out of 10 crews home. The Mustang yielded a fundamentally different reality. Only 6 out of 10 survived equivalent structural trauma. The massive steel engine block of the air-cooled Thunderbolt actively shielded the aviator. The Mustang offered no such armor. The liquid-cooled Merlin engine contained a fatal structural vulnerability. The entire propulsion unit depended on an exposed network of radiators and pressurized tubing. A single armor-piercing round ruptured the cooling circuit. The instrument panel temperature needle instantly jumped into the extreme red zone. An acrid chemical scent of vaporizing ethylene glycol flooded the confined cockpit space. The Merlin power plant operated normally at 120 degrees Celsius. Without circulating fluid, immense internal friction initiated catastrophic thermal runaway. The steel pistons permanently welded to the cylinder walls in under 15 minutes. The engine seized with violent vibration. A punctured coolant jacket forced the pilot onto a rigid chronological countdown. The compromised aircraft granted a maximum of 10 to 20 minutes of powered flight. Over the deep industrial zones of the Ruhr Valley, this operational window meant nothing. The propeller stopped. Altitude dropped steadily. Bailing out at 200 feet offered zero time for parachute deployment. The home runway remained unreachable. A successful parachute deployment from a failing aircraft merely transferred the airman into the jurisdiction of Heinrich Himmler. By 1943, official terminology underwent a systematic revision. Joseph Goebbels erased the words pilot and crew from state media. Propaganda broadcasts introduced a new vocabulary. Allied aviators became Terrorfliegers and Luftgangsters. This linguistic shift stripped captured personnel of basic military protections. They lost combatant status. They became legal targets. Heinrich Himmler transformed this rhetoric into a formal administrative directive. He issued explicit orders to all SS and local police detachments across the country. Security forces received a strict mandate to stand down. They halted all interventions during physical confrontations between German civilians and descending pilots. The state authorized localized murder. Police units simply watched. Post-war investigations documented 3,000 cases of lynch justice. Survival meant entering the official prisoner system. At liberation, medical boards recorded the average weight of surviving aviators at barely 90 pounds. Physicians classified this physiological decline as terminal stage starvation. The diagnostic parameters matched the medical data of concentration camp inmates entirely. Yet reaching formal captivity remained a rare privilege. Armed civilian mobs intercepted the parachutes and beat the grounded crews to death. The operational chaos of 1944 reached such a magnitude that even elite personnel could not escape it. Exactly how did the most successful fighter pilot of the entire war meet his end? The ground forces he protected killed him. Major George Preddy recorded 27 aerial victories. He survived countless engagements. He mastered the Mustang completely. Yet the operational environment remained equally lethal for both novices and veterans. Christmas Day, 1944, the Battle of the Bulge. Preddy pursued a retreating German fighter at low altitude. He forced his aircraft down to the tree line. Below him, American anti-aircraft crews operated under severe combat stress. They acquired the fast-moving silhouette. They skipped visual confirmation. A deafening, continuous roar of friendly anti-aircraft batteries erupted simultaneously from the Ardennes forest. The crews locked their sights onto the shape. Tracers from 50 caliber machine guns tore directly through the wings and fuselage of the Mustang. The physics of the engagement offered no survival margin. A 50 caliber projectile travels at 2,900 feet per second. At treetop altitude, this absolute velocity left Preddy 0 milliseconds to react. The cockpit shattered. A friendly round severed his femoral artery, inducing massive hemorrhage and immediate unconsciousness before the airframe struck the earth. Losing more than half the flight crew in 1944 stemmed from a systemic operational flaw. The complex fuel management protocol guaranteed fatal outcomes. Minimal procedural deviations destroyed the aircraft. The Mustang carried internal and external tanks. The internal fuselage tank dictated survival. Fully loaded, it shifted the center of gravity dangerously aft. The airframe became critically unstable. Pilots burned this internal fuel first. Only then did they prepare for engagements. The drop tank release lever served as the absolute boundary between escort mode and combat. A mechanical clank echoed through the unpressurized cockpit. The airframe delivered a sharp jolt as it shed the external mass. Aerodynamic drag vanished. The center of gravity stabilized. The aircraft entered its operational combat configuration. Engagements lasted minutes, sometimes seconds. Pilots directed 650 caliber machine guns against maneuvering targets, requiring absolute precision within a constantly collapsing three-dimensional airspace. But the primary failure point remained physiological. Escort missions spanned 8 continuous hours. Ambient temperatures at 30,000 feet dropped to -50 degrees Celsius. Pilots breathed exclusively through synthetic oxygen systems. High-G kinetic maneuvers induced severe vascular stress. These physiological overloads, compounded with chronic oxygen starvation, systematically triggering irreversible depletion of the central nervous system. Post-combat adrenaline drops left pilots severely incapacitated. Aerial warfare devolved into a strict mechanical process of biological survival. Fighter units absorbed relentless mathematical attrition. Squadron rosters depleted daily. The statistical data for 1944 confirmed massive, irrecoverable losses, more than 50%. The survivors of extreme physiological stress became the primary instruments of a new operational doctrine in early 1944. Escort units transitioned into hunter squadrons. What were the demographic consequences of Operation Big Week? The offensive reduced the Luftwaffe's operational strength by half in a single week. In February 1944, American command deliberately targeted German aviation factories. The objective was simple: force the enemy into the air. German fighter squadrons scrambled to protect the industrial zones. They flew directly into advanced sweeps of American Mustangs. Interceptors eradicated 355 German aircraft. Previously, fighters remained tethered to bomber formations. The new doctrine pushed Mustangs 50 to 100 miles ahead. They sterilized the airspace before the bombers even arrived. Pilots actively pursued retreating targets and strafed enemy airfields on their return route. The Luftwaffe failed to absorb this attrition rate. Fighter cockpits remained empty. Desperate to maintain defensive capabilities, German command restructured the training syllabus. The disparity became fatal. An Allied pilot required 300 hours of flight time to qualify for combat. German reservists received 75 hours. 75 hours provided only elementary flight control. Germany struggled to produce 26 new pilots per month. America trained 29,000 aviators during that same year. Untrained novices systematically confronted seasoned veterans. The demographic collapse of the German aviation sector became a mathematical certainty. By April 1945, the operational Luftwaffe had ceased to exist. But before the strategic triumph of 1944, the system demanded a harsh physical toll. Back in November 1943, the 8th Air Force faced a critical escort deficit. The newly equipped 354th Fighter Group deployed immediately. Command bypassed standard training protocols. Time ran out. Men climbed into the new fighter with virtually zero conversion hours. They memorized the instrument panels while flying directly toward the target. The operational reality pushed human endurance to the absolute limit. The daily cycle began before dawn. Pilots studied the bomber rendezvous routes under dim electric lights in cold briefing rooms. Then came the physiological preparation. Crews strapped themselves into layers of heavy gear. Thick gloves and sheepskin jackets served as the single defense against extreme frostbite. Engines ignited in total darkness. The squadrons formed up over the English Channel and headed east. Missions lasted anywhere from 4 to 6 hours. Operating altitudes reached 25,000 feet. Up there, the ambient temperature plummeted to -40 degrees. The aircraft lacked any functional cabin heating. Moisture froze solid inside the rubber oxygen masks. A 6-hour flight in an unheated cabin burned the exact same calories as a day of heavy physical labor. The physical degradation hit fast. Pilots rotated their heads mechanically, continuously scanning the freezing void for an enemy contact. The 8th Air Force sacrificed personnel training for one specific platform, prioritizing the immediate deployment of the new P-51B modification. Engineers overhauled the armament. Mechanics mounted 650 caliber machine guns. Ammunition bays held 1,880 rounds. Designers then installed the bubble canopy. Structural blind spots vanished. Pilots gained an unobstructed visual field. What element finally removed the range limitations? The integration of two 108-gallon drop tanks. The newly integrated Merlin engine burned fuel with unprecedented efficiency. These external additions pushed the operational radius beyond 1,000 miles. Escorts could now reach Berlin. They protected the heavy bomber formations over the primary targets, engaged German interceptors in sustained dogfights, and destroyed ground targets on the return vector. This machine definitively closed the strategic vulnerability. The hardest phase lay ahead. The monstrous evolution of German air defense in late 1943 dictated the demand for a 1,000-mile combat radius. The Luftwaffe engineered itself into a fatal trap. German pilots trained exclusively to execute heavy bombers. Standard machine guns failed to pierce layered fuselage armor. Command demanded brute force. Ground crews bolted 20mm cannons directly under the wings of the Bf-109. The FW-190 pushed the structural limits further. Its airframe absorbed 4 20mm cannons alongside heavy machine guns. Mechanics hoisted massive 30mm cannons into external gondolas. Steel mounts locked. Other dedicated interceptor variants received thick armored glass and launch tubes for unguided rockets. Against bombers, this firepower guaranteed a kill. Physics exacted a price. Every additional weapon shifted the center of gravity. Excess mass and severe aerodynamic drag transformed nimble interceptors into sluggish platforms. Survival depended critically on maintaining superior altitude. They could not turn. Then the American escorts arrived. United States doctrine shifted from passive defense to aggressive hunting. Engagements erupted at altitudes exceeding 20,000 feet. In this thin air, the heavily armed German machines faced mathematical disaster. The clean aerodynamics of the P-51 effortlessly outmaneuvered the overloaded interceptors. German pilots had nowhere to run. The rapid attrition of these crippled squadrons permanently broke the back of German air power. 14%. That was the mathematical probability of surviving a 25-mission combat tour. Before long-range interceptors altered the airspace, heavy Focke-Wulfs executed unescorted bombers with absolute impunity. The autumn of 1943 became a statistical catastrophe. Loss rates reached 8% per individual sortie. The average operational life expectancy for a heavy bomber plummeted to exactly 11 missions. Each B-17 carried 10 specialists into the freezing troposphere. Most never completed half their tour. Burning aviation fuel saturated the autumn air over Central Europe. Formations collapsed. Shattered aluminum airframes scattered across the German countryside. Surviving airmen abandoned doomed fuselages, descending under parachutes straight into enemy territory. Attrition peaked during Black Week in October. Luftwaffe interceptors systematically dismantled the daylight formations. Enemy cannons destroyed or critically crippled 2/3 of the deployed heavy fleet in a matter of days. Hundreds of aviators died instantly. Hundreds more went into prisoner camps. Analysts reviewed the destruction and identified a terminal operational failure. Losing 2/3 of active aircraft meant the entire Strategic Air Army would mathematically cease to exist within 90 days. Without an immediate doctrinal shift, the military needed to construct and train a completely new bomber force every 3 months. Generals evaluated the terminal mathematics. Allied command officially suspended unescorted deep daylight operations and demanded a long-range fighter escort. Command registered the sheer scale of the slaughter. They urgently demanded a shield. But the fighters stationed on English runways, the P-47 Thunderbolt and the P-38 Lightning, were fundamentally incapable of bridging the distance. Why could the massive P-47 not escort the raids? Its operational radius terminated at the western German border. The engineering directly dictated the casualty rates. The Thunderbolt held 305 gallons of internal aviation fuel. Its massive radial engine contained a critical operational flaw. It structurally could not run in an economical mode while maintaining combat power. During intense dogfights, the cylinders devoured 100 gallons per hour. Pilots watched their dials plummet. On internal reserves alone, the combat radius collapsed to 165 miles. In early 1943, ground crews attached external drop tanks. This pushed the maximum reach to 250 miles. But geography offered no compromises. The strategic targets in Berlin sat 600 miles away. An American pilot could not cross the continent, engage enemy interceptors, and survive the journey back. The mathematical reality offered zero solutions. The heavy bombers remained defenseless. Engineers proposed a mechanical fix. They mounted external fuel reservoirs under the wings and along the fuselage. Pilots drained this auxiliary supply first. Then, they jettisoned the heavy, hollow steel weight of the empty tanks before entering combat. But drop tank technology failed to bypass the fundamental geographic limit. The catastrophic thirst of the Thunderbolt's power plant consumed any extra capacity. Logistics dictated brutal mathematics. To push an airframe 600 miles, the Thunderbolt consumed roughly 260 gallons of high-octane fuel. Brute force devoured volume. Analysts ran a parallel calculation for a different machine. The Mustang required only 108 gallons to cross the exact same 600 miles. Superior aerodynamic design slashed the consumption rate by more than half. The ultimate solution demanded structural fuel efficiency rather than temporary external plumbing. Military planners redirected their strategic focus toward this highly efficient platform. Engineers took the experimental aircraft and began constructing its final operational form. A long-range platform requiring exactly 108 gallons of fuel already existed. But until April 1942, Command discarded it as useless for strategic missions due to its severely underpowered original engine. What happened when a British engineer proposed installing a Spitfire engine? The altitude ceiling instantly rose to 40,000 feet. The turning point required one individual. Rolls-Royce test pilot Ronald Harker flew the early Mustang variant for the Royal Air Force. He recognized the profound mismatch. The flawless aerodynamic design housed an inadequate power plant. Harker demanded a transplant. He wanted the Merlin engine from the Spitfire inside the American airframe. Bureaucracy nearly killed the initiative. The Ministry of Aircraft Production rejected the early proposals. Officials had strictly allocated every existing Merlin engine for British defense needs. Spares did not exist. The paperwork stalled. Eventually, Harker forced an exception. He secured one experimental airframe. British mechanics went to work. They unbolted the heavy Allison block. They extracted the old power plant from the mounts. Hoists lowered the liquid-cooled Merlin down into the vacant American chassis. Technicians integrated a newly developed two-stage supercharger. They secured a massive four-bladed propeller to the nose. The modified prototype took off. The steady hum of the four-bladed propeller reverberated through the thin air at a previously unattainable altitude. Instruments recorded unprecedented metrics. True airspeed reached 433 miles per hour. The engine sustained full power output exactly where the previous model choked. This single engineering decision unlocked the ultimate high-altitude escort. Thousands of heavy bomber crews would survive the war because of this exact mechanical synthesis. Following the conclusive test flights, the government authorized immediate license production of the revolutionary variant inside America. The intervention by Ronald Harker was a mechanical necessity. He had to rescue a brilliant platform from its original core. North American Aviation had installed a liquid-cooled Allison engine producing 1,000 horsepower. Structurally, the design was a masterclass. The revolutionary fuselage cut aerodynamic drag almost in half. an aerodynamically perfect airframe, outperforming every competitor on the deck. Shackled to a power plant choking to death in thin air. Physics dictated the terms. Allied heavy bomber formations operated at altitudes above 20,000 feet. At that elevation, oxygen density collapses. Engineers had tuned the Allison specifically for low-level atmospheric pressure. Past 20,000 feet, the cylinders starved. Power output plummeted. The aircraft stalled. Without thrust, the fighter transformed into a static target for diving German interceptors. Air Command needed a high-altitude shield. This machine could not deliver it. Generals stripped the aircraft of its strategic escort duties. They deployed the first arriving batches exclusively for low-level ground attacks and tactical reconnaissance. This paradoxical machine, possessing a flawless airframe but severely limited by a low-altitude engine, emerged from absolute industrial panic. Engineers drafted and built the initial interceptor in a staggering 12 days. To trace this structural anomaly, we must step back to 1940. The Royal Air Force confronted a catastrophic deficit of combat aircraft. British purchasing commissions urgently approached North American aviation. London requested immediate licensed manufacturing of the aging P-40 Warhawk. Britain needed sheer volume. North American executives rejected the standard assembly contract. They countered with an unprecedented strategic gamble. The company proposed designing an entirely new, aerodynamically superior interceptor from scratch. A conventional aeronautical development cycle demanded 3 to 5 years of extensive research. North American pledged to deliver a functional platform in under 120 days. Experts deemed the timeline mathematically impossible. The engineering department immediately discarded traditional sequential protocols. Draftsmen and mechanics integrated their workflows directly on the factory floor. They shattered their own contractual deadline of 120 days. Assembly crews finalized the first physical prototype in exactly 12. The sudden rush to engineer a fighter prototype in 1940 stemmed from a fundamental doctrinal failure. American military theorists of the 1930s categorically rejected the concept of long-range escorts. Planners classified pursuit aircraft strictly as short-range domestic interceptors. Bombers operated as the absolute offensive spearhead. The War Department built an entire strategy around daylight precision bombing. A bombardier pressed his face against the cold rubber optic. The Norden bombsight crosshairs locked onto German industrial complexes from 25,000 feet. Masks froze. Oxygen hissed through cracked hoses. Cabinet officers believed this extreme altitude guaranteed pinpoint destruction. High Command explicitly dismissed the British model of nocturnal area bombardment. They expected to crush enemy infrastructure without the bloody attrition of trench warfare. This theoretical confidence required an armored platform. The shield was firepower. The B-17 Flying Fortress carried 1350 caliber heavy machine guns. Desk strategists calculated that overlapping trajectories from massive formations created a mathematically impenetrable defensive box. Commanders deemed long-range fighters technically impossible. Escorts meant extra weight. The rigid adherence to daylight precision strikes became a catastrophic analytical miscalculation. Rejecting the British night bombing warnings cost thousands of American aviation crewmen their blood. The United States Army Air Forces launched the European Strategic Bombing Campaign in 1943. Heavy bomber groups crossed into hostile airspace completely unescorted.